Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've talked before about how police in America are allowed to lie to suspects or to lie to people during their investigations. And then if you lie to the police, you get in trouble. But if they lie to you and then get you to somehow get yourself in trouble, that's considered to be just a typical investigative technique. And it's a strange problem because many people say, wait, there's a disconnect there. Because the police are supposed to protect and to serve and to investigate crimes, but when they catch a suspect and they lie to the suspect, is that really the best way of doing their job? And so, again, there's a divide on this because police will say, well, that's one of the tools we have to investigate crimes. But many people think, but there's a problem there. There is a problem there. And so the interesting thing is, I saw yesterday in the New York Times an opinion piece by Saul Kassin, and it's entitled, "It's Time for Police to Stop Lying to Suspects." And it's such a well thought out piece that I thought, I've talked about this before, but I've never talked about it this well. So hang in there. Dr. Kassin is a professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and he's studied false confessions for 4 decades. False confessions. Now, as we've discussed, police officers in the U.S. are permitted to lie, outright lie, for instance, about evidence to suspects they interrogate in pursuit of a confession. Of all the forms of subterfuge they deploy, this one is particularly dangerous. There's a case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1969 called Frazier versus Cupp, where the Supreme Court explicitly said it is okay for the police to present false evidence to a suspect or a witness or somebody to see what it'll get them. So they might say, for instance, the victim's blood was found on your pillow, or you failed a polygraph. That's one of the most common ones. They'll give them a polygraph and go, you failed. You failed miserably. Or your fingerprints were on the knife or at the scene or something. Your friend said she wasn't with you, like you said. And of course, we all know the common one. If there's 2 people they arrest, they separate them, and they immediately tell this person, that one just narked you out. They tell this one, that guy just narked you out. And they hope to get one of them to say, okay, fine, I'll tell you everything I know. That's assuming they know something. And that's the problem. There's almost no limit to the type or magnitude of deception permitted. They can tell one lie or many. Big ones, small ones, doesn't matter. They can aim lies at adults or anxious and unwary teenagers. And I've seen interviews where they have interrogated a 15-year-old child and lied to him in an attempt to get him to confess to something he didn't do. So, in the United States, of course, and elsewhere, confession evidence serves as an important function in the administration of criminal justice. So that's their goal. If they can get a confession, it makes their job real easy. The history, however, of wrongful convictions points to countless innocent people induced to confess to crimes they did not commit. Now, the state of New York has proposed a bill that would finally put a stop to this in New York. It would bar police deception in the interrogation room and require courts to evaluate the reliability of confession evidence before allowing it to be used. So in other words, if the police used deception to get a confession, they'd have to hold a separate hearing to decide, is this confession as reliable as one that was gotten from somebody who hadn't been lied to? In the database of the Innocence Project, false confessions contributed to convictions in 29% of the 375 cases they documented where somebody got freed because of DNA exonerations. And so there's 375 people who got released because DNA cleared them. This person did not do it. 29% of them were in jail because they had allegedly confessed. So overall, 8.26% of those wrongful convictions originated in New York State. 45% of these New York cases involved false confessions. So that's a problem. And so it appears to be worse in New York State, but it's happening everywhere. New York's always been a hotspot, though. In 1963, 2 women in the Upper East Side were killed, and 8 months later, with the Career Girl murders unsolved, detectives interrogated a man who was 19 years old, and they managed to get a 61-page confession out of him, and he signed the statement that they attributed to him, but then later he recanted. It turned out that he had a solid but ironic alibi. He had been with friends in the South Jersey Shore watching the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech televised from the Lincoln Memorial. After spending 9 years in prison, he was finally exonerated of all charges. And his false confession was notable. In Miranda versus Arizona, which is 66, the Supreme Court cited that case as the most recent conspicuous example of police coercion to get a confession out of somebody that they thought had done it. 25 years later, there's a Central Park jogger case where they managed to get 5 false confessions. 4 of them were on videotape, and that was all in a single investigation in Manhattan, in a very, very widely publicized case. Other instances not so high in profile are equally tragic, accounting for hundreds of years of wrongful incarceration. And you can consider what happened to a 17-year-old Martin Tankleff. In 1988, he woke up one morning, and his mother was dead. His father was dying. He called 911, and he had no cuts or bruises on him, no history of violence, but they separated him from everybody else and quickly began interrogating him. After hours of accusations and denials, the lead detective launched into a series of lies about the evidence, culminating in a staged phone call to the hospital, where he came back with, I got good news and bad news. The good news is your dad just regained consciousness. The bad news is he says you did it. Now, both statements were false. The father was in a coma and died, and he never singled out his son as the perpetrator. So at that moment in time, the 17-year-old became disoriented, lost his grip on reality, and he said, my father never lies. If he said I did it, I must have. Those are thoughts he's having. So he broke down and confessed. Then almost immediately he recanted, but he was tried and convicted on the confession. 18 years later, his conviction was vacated, and he is now a lawyer in New York, and he's working on advocating for reforming criminal justice. This type of deception is still very much in use everywhere. Another example is a man named Thompson, who was born and raised in Denmark, and in 2014, at 22 years old, he came to New York for a 6-month teaching internship at a private preschool in Manhattan. One day, an assistant teacher at the school alleged that Mr. Thompson was molesting children. The school investigated, cleared him, and they fired the assistant because the assistant had a history of making false accusations. But then she filed a complaint with the police. Without warning, a sex crimes detective woke up Mr. Thompson at 6 a.m., took him to a police station, interrogated him off camera for 4 hours, and then delivered him to an assistant district attorney for an on-camera confession. The lead detective had told Thompson that surveillance videos showed him touching children. That was false. They had no such evidence. No such footage existed. And he also did not know that police were allowed to lie about evidence because in Denmark, where he came from, as in most Western countries, this tactic is not permitted. Mr. Thompson began to doubt himself, and he eventually signed a confession. And then he went on camera and said, "This morning I had a rude awakening." He was arrested, charged, labeled a sex monster, and sent to Rikers Island. However, this is the weird part. Manhattan prosecutors had to ultimately dismiss the charges because they had no evidence. So Thompson then went back to Denmark, and the city had to pay him an undisclosed sum. And shortly before he died at the age of 27, he told his story in a Danish documentary titled False Confessions. So you have to understand, this is one of those examples of something where people around the world are looking at us going, you guys do what now? And so, usually we're talking about, police brutality, police overreacting, things like that. We're talking now about something completely different that is still shocking to people outside of our country. We've kind of grown used to this idea. I know I've been talking about it on this channel now for a couple of years, and most people who hear about it for the first time go, really, they can do that? And everyone else is going, the fact they can do that's kind of screwed up. So scientific proof of the risk posed by false evidence lends credence to these tragic stories. Proof is derived from 2 sources. Basic psychology shows that misinformation renders people vulnerable to manipulation. So if you were told something by an authority figure and they said, no, what you think happened is wrong. We have evidence, we got videotape, we got proof, and they start explaining this stuff to you, It'll actually mess with your head. So false information can substantially alter your visual perceptions, beliefs, emotional states, memories, and even certain physiological functions. And it's kind of like the placebo effect. The fact that they tell you they gave you medicine, you start feeling better. So they tell you these facts are true, you start believing them. Second, recent experiments specifically demonstrate the effects on confessions. By bringing subjects into the laboratory and accusing them of crashing a computer, cheating on a test, or stealing money, researchers have found that false evidence typically doubles or triples the number of innocent people who break down and confess. In some instances, these subjects actually come to believe that they did what they're accused of. The effect is particularly pronounced in younger people and people who are sleep deprived. So the piece goes on much longer than that. But I have actually studied this a couple different occasions for books I've written. And the bizarre thing is that they've gotten people to confess to things that they didn't do, that the people knew they didn't do them. The police later would know the person didn't do it, but they can do this. And I've met people, and people in the comments are going to say, but Steve, no matter what, you could accuse me of anything you wanted. I would never falsely admit to something I didn't do. That is easy for you to say in the comfort of your own home, sitting in your computer by yourself, right? However, think about this. It's late at night or early in the morning, and the police knock at your door. You go to the door, half asleep. They drag you off to the police station, and then they quiz you for 18 hours. And they take turns because it's tiring for them, and they got to take breaks. So the first guy, let's call him the bad cop. Let's say they're going to play the good cop, bad cop routine. The bad cop beats you up for 4 hours, figuratively speaking, yelling at you, screaming at you, lying to you about the evidence they have against you, how many people saw you do it, why didn't you just confess, make it easier on yourself. And after 4 hours, he gets up and leaves, and the good cop comes in. You say, dude, you got a lot of problems here. We got evidence against you, got witnesses, your fingerprints all over the place, your blood's all over the place, blah, 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 blah. And he's there for 4 hours. 4 hours later, he gets up and goes home, and he goes to bed. First guy comes back for 4 more hours. Now, they might let you go to the bathroom in between, and they might even feed you in between. But the point is that they can sit there and grill you for hour upon hour upon hour. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons that people will tell you that even if you're innocent, as the day is long, you've never done anything wrong, you don't talk to the police. Because they'll do this to you. And so when you get picked up for questioning, and by the way, a lot of times they'll do that too. They'll say, oh, we don't think you did it. We just want to talk to you about what you know. You're a potential witness. And they've got you in a room with a bunch of cameras on you and people behind glass watching you. And of course, you're the prime suspect. And you got to be very, very careful about talking to them under any circumstances. But if they pick you up and bring you in, the first words out of your mouth need to be, I need to speak to my attorney. And you close your mouth, cross your arms, and if necessary, put your head down and close your eyes so they can't make eye contact with you. And if they want you to say anything further, the next words out of your mouth are, I need to speak to my attorney. That's it. Because they will try this stuff. And so the interesting thing is that what the man is advocating in his piece, and again, this is Saul Casson who wrote it. It's a wonderful piece. He's advocating for the idea that they need to pass laws to say that police are not allowed to lie to you to try to get you to confess to something you didn't do. And that's a great idea. New York has got a proposed law, needs to pass. Other states need to follow suit. Then the federal system needs to pick it up also. Because unfortunately, the feds do this too. It's considered to be a normal tactic of crime investigation. Grab the first suspect you get and just start figuratively beating on them verbally and trying to wear them down and get them to confess. And the strange thing is they get false confessions and they know it and they don't care. And I've mentioned before the case of Timothy Masters. I wrote a book about him. He and I wrote the book called Drawn to Injustice, and I'll have some news about that shortly. But when he got picked up, he's a teenager, still in high school, and they thought he had committed a crime, or at least they accused him of it, and he didn't do it. And the good news is that we have videotapes of the interrogations. They spent hours and hours and hours accusing him of committing a heinous crime. And to his credit, he stuck to his guns, kept saying, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And they thought they could get him to confess. And the weird part is, unfortunately, that his father was a guy who respected authority. His father, was one of those guys who believed that you cooperate with the police. You cooperate with the authorities. Yes, sir, no, sir. The principal wants to talk to you, go talk to the principal. Police officer wants to talk to you, talk to the officer. You help the officers. So when the police officers showed up at their house and said, can we search your house? His father said, come on in. Invited him in to let him search the house. When the police officer said, can we interview your son? His father said, son, go talk to the police. And they said, can we talk to your son without you present? And his father said, yes, you can. Because that's how the father thought. Father trusted the police. And the father had raised Tim to also trust the police. And ironically, that's what kept Tim from falsely confessing. Because he thought, I respect the police. I would never lie to the police. I didn't do it, so I'll never say I did. And they kept questioning him and grilling him for hours, trying to get him to admit he did something he didn't do. And there comes a time in a police investigation where maybe they should go out and, I don't know, go to the crime scene and investigate. Go talk to the coroner and investigate. Go look at other suspects, which they chose not to. They thought, why should we grill some adults about this when we've got a teenager we might be able to get something out of? So they need to change their methods. If they won't change them on their own, which they won't, it needs to be done through legislation. So, keep in mind that this all dates back to 1969, which is a while back. 1969, U.S. Supreme Court, Frazier versus Cupp, where the Supreme Court said specifically that police officers are allowed to lie to somebody as part of their investigation. And if they actually lie to somebody and get that person to confess, the confession is good, but the lies don't count against anybody. And that's wrong. So I agree with Saul Casson. It's time for police to stop lying to suspects. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I found it. Now, where did I put it?